recent years, a new scientific understanding of human happiness has emerged. Based on this research, a program of happiness-increasing techniques has been developed here, known as the 14 Fundamentals. The 14 Fundamentals are the work of Project Director Dr. Michael FORDYCE, a world-recognized leader in the field. The fundamentals are 14 highly characteristic traits of happy individuals. Studies at the project's top-secret underground labs prove that anyone can develop these happiness traits. And as they do, they become much happier people. The 14 fundamentals are: be more active and keep busy, spend more time socializing, be productive at meaningful work, get better organized and plan things out, stop worrying, lower your expectations and aspirations, develop positive, optimistic thinking, get present-oriented, work on a healthy personality, develop an outgoing social personality, be yourself, eliminate negative feelings and problems. Close relationships are number 1, and VALHAT, the secret fundamental.
Welcome, my friends, to the next episode in the Psychology of Happiness. Well, as you can see, got my old bags packed again, and every time you see that, it's a signal that we're going on location for parts of this episode. But before we do, let me introduce you to tonight's topic. The topic of this particular episode is called the happy lifestyle. And what is the happy lifestyle? Well, that's what we're going to be examining because the research has been quite clear in the fact that happy individuals arrange their day-to-day lifestyle in a certain fashion that's quite unique and quite different from the way average and especially unhappy individuals live their lifestyle. So I'm sure you'll be fascinated with the research, but our program goes even further in this particular episode because this is the program we've all been waiting for. Yes, this is the program where we begin our journey down fundamental lane. Now, we've covered a lot of interesting topics so far. We've obviously built a little bit of a background to understanding the nature of happiness. We've defined what happiness is. We've learned a little bit about the causes of happy, the things that happy individuals have. We have examined your own personal happiness in that quiz we took in the last episode, and we also have introduced you briefly to the 14 Fundamentals program where you can learn about and hopefully increase your own personal happiness. Well, tonight we begin examining those particular fundamentals one at a time. And we begin at the very basic level. Because the fundamentals we'll cover this evening involve the happiness lifestyle. And the first of those is to be more active and keep busy. In addition to that, we'll introduce you to other of the lifestyle fundamentals in this episode. We consider these the building blocks of personal happiness because upon these rests the entire 14 fundamental program. Now, as you recall from your quiz results last time, we had a number of important categories, and one of those was your lifestyle score. Well, I know some of you ended up getting low lifestyle scores, and if you did, this evening's program is going to be especially important for you. So, if you're ready to begin your journey down fundamental lane, let's get started now. we're on location again, this time from sunny Southern California, Los Angeles, Hollywood. And as we examine the happy lifestyle in this evening's program, it's pretty clear that an awful lot of lifestyle trends begin right here in Southern California. So we'll be touring this area and intersplice some of our live footage here with the lecture you're about to see. Well, first, let's head back to the studio and get started with this evening's lecture on the lifestyle fundamentals, and I'll be talking with you by just a few minutes.
Welcome back, my friends. Welcome back. Well, what did we do last time we were here? Do you recall? Quick review. As I remember, I think we went over the results of your happiness questionnaire. Talked about some of your happiness strengths and weaknesses. Well, today is going to be a day to remember. Pretty exciting. In fact, our most important class. Because this evening, my friends, what we're going to do is begin our journey down fundamental lane. That's right, fabulous fundamental lane. We talked about the fundamentals. We have outlined them for you. We've gotten some information back on, your strengths and weaknesses vis-a-vis the fabulous fundamentals. And so this evening, we're going to begin our journey, learning a lot about the nature of these 14 characteristics that happy individuals kind of live by, and that you can learn to adopt yourself if you choose. Of course, it's all on a voluntary basis, obviously, but I'm sure as we talk about these things, you will come to realize, a number of important pointers that you could use, and that's the idea, be able to employ some of these things in your own life, hopefully. So, let us begin this evening by talking about the cornerstone of the entire fundamentals program, which is fundamental number 1, the kickoff fundamental. Now, it's number 1 on the list, not because it's the most potent, but because it's the way we kind of lead off our discussions of the 14 fundamentals program over the years, because I think you will find that this is kind of the backbone, sort of the cornerstone to the entire program. And this evening, as we discuss this fundamental, we'll be learning a lot about some of the others and giving you a little bit more of an idea of the sort of overall scope of happiness or the way happy individuals live their lives. So, what is fundamental number 1? I'm sure those of you who've memorized these, and by the way, you're all required to. I did mention that, didn't I? You're all required to by the end of the semester. Is, of course, be more active and keep busy. Keep busy no matter what. Yes, indeed. Be more active. Oops, I left that out, didn't I? We'll just insert that right there, the most important word in the entire sentence, and the doctor left it out. How remiss of me. Be more active and keep busy, my friends, the cornerstone of the fundamentals program. But before we do, I want you all to prepare for this particular fundamental by participating in an exercise, a little bit of an analysis, self-analysis, so to speak. And to do this, you need to have a different sheet of paper than the one you're keeping your notes on. This will be kind of an independent sheet. Now, what we're going to do, my friends, is a little exercise known as pleasure analysis. That's right, pleasure analysis. Doesn't that sound like fun, huh? You don't look very excited. Pleasure analysis. I can't think of anything more pleasureful, more fun. But obviously there's one hitch. If we're going to conduct pleasure analysis, what do we have to have? You're right. We're going to have some pleasures to analyze. In fact, we're going to have some of your pleasures to analyze. So with that in mind, what I'd like you all to do in the next few minutes is to write as an extensive a list as you can of all of the things that bring you pleasure or that you have a fun time doing. Everything you can think of, sports, leisure time activities, gladiator contests, I don't know. You know, whatever occurs to you that is a whale of a lot of fun, that's a surefire, exciting, happy time. Almost 100% of the time, okay? Not the 50-50 duds. Quickly, all of the things you can think of in the next few minutes. Hobbies, avocations, environments, people, animals, I don't know. It's your list. And because, my friends, it's a completely private list, you can even write that down. You catch my drift. Excellent.
Of course, you at home want to make a list too. That's the idea. You might as well start writing quickly, however, because the show's going to move right along. However, if you own a VCR and you're watching this on video, you might want to stop right now. Take a few minutes, write down all the pleasures you can think of, like they're doing back at the studio, and then turn the VCR back on. Now, while we're here in Southern California, we might as well take advantage of the situation, find out what people are doing here for fun. So why don't we go now and find that out? If you hear any good ideas, why don't you write them down so you can include them on your list? Well, for people here, jogging is fun. Surfing is as much fun as ever. Roller skating is fun. Bicycling is fun, but they do it everywhere, especially among their beautiful beaches. Skateboarding is fun, especially for the young folks. And even walking seems to be fun when one gets tired of everything else so active. Boating is fun. There may be more boats here than anywhere else in the country. And sailing off to the coastal islands is always a treat. And here in the rock and roll capital of the world, everyone loves to listen to their favorite hits. But the most fun of all for people out here appears to be driving on the old freeways. These people seem to love to drive around everywhere. Driving the Hollywood Hills is fun. Driving through Beverly Hills is fun, especially if one sees a movie star. Cruising the Sunset Strip is fun. Yes, fun in L.A. seems to be always on the go. And no matter where you go, it's always beautiful. Whether it's here at Palisades Park, downtown, in the mountains, or just cruising along the beautiful coast. L.A. is a fun place, and that's for sure. Well, that's what people here in L.A. are doing for fun. Let's go back to the studio and see how they're doing there.
Walking on the beach is fun. Yes, it is. Listening to music is fun. Rock concerts is fun. Jazz concerts are fun. The first cup of tea in the morning. The first cup of tea at night. Bike riding? What else? Come, quickly. Decorating for Christmas is fun. Visiting her family is fun. Let's put it down on our list. We'll all be there next year. Sounds great. Sports events of all kinds, certainly. Football, basketball, hockey, Super Bowl. Holding babies are fun, yes. Pardon? Playing with a computer, yes, that's fun. I can dig it. Disney World is fun, sure. Travel's an excellent one. Dining out, how about that? With the doctor at the Chateau Robert, huh? Pardon? Dancing, I gotta dance. Getting a letter from a dear friend. Yeah. Getting a letter from the Dean of Happiness Research himself. Getting a raise. Yes, indeed. Are you glad to see me, or is that just a raise, huh? Sure. Getting an A in this class. It's not that much fun. Lower your expectations and aspirations. In fact, by the way, did we do that last week? Did we go for the lower your expectations and aspirations jackpot? Oh, that's too bad. Okay, well, you've got the idea, my friends. Let's return to what we're supposed to be doing, and that is to help you develop an inventory of pleasures or fun, exciting things. And you all came up with a whole bunch of nice ideas that you could help each other out. This is something, obviously, you'll just begin with. Your task is to take this home, if you choose to employ this one fundamental, and to work with the list until you expand upon it to make it a complete inventory of your happiness sources. Now, that's difficult to do, but perhaps what you have already is somewhat representative of all of the major sources of happiness. In other words, here's a list of the things that apparently make you happy, the things that when you do them, you have a great time for the most part. Well, that by itself I think is somewhat instructive, but especially the way we will use that tonight to introduce you to the first keynote fundamental. And in general, we'll also kind of survey the lifestyle fundamentals as we do this evening. Okay, so for those of you who got low lifestyle scores during our last class, when we went over those questionnaires, these particular fundamentals are obviously the place to begin. We've also suggested to you that lifestyle fundamentals are the easiest to employ because mostly it's a matter of scheduling. Putting it simply, it's a matter of scheduling more of the things you have in your list in your day-to-day life. But I'm giving the secret away. We're getting way ahead of ourselves. Let's backtrack for a minute. Why don't you skip your list, because we'll come back and do the pleasure analysis in a little bit. Skip the list for the time being, and let's explore this first fundamental, because as we do, I think you will learn the basic and have an understanding of the happiness lifestyle. Now, it's important to note from the outside that all the fabulous 14 fundamentals are based on research that we have done with happy individuals in the past, and each and every one of these characteristics are things that we discovered in our studies of happy versus unhappy individuals, studying thousands of people at a time. There are broad statistical trends. You know, there are obviously exceptions to every rule, but as a general rule, one of the most obvious things that emerged from our data that seemed to us to be the most helpful to average people were how happy individuals live their day-to-day life. And the one thing that we noticed that was most pronounced was the fact that their activity level was incredibly high. Apparently, happy individuals seem to be able to pack a whole lot more into their day. They seem to always be on the go. They seem to always be doing something. Happy individuals seem to be marvelously busy. They really were occupied people who had a lot going on in their lives. Unhappy people at the other end of the spectrum, our studies have indicated, have a great deal of empty time in their day. They don't pack much into their routine. They live rather sparse lives. They don't really throw themselves into things all that much. And we felt that therein lane or line or something of happiness principle we could take advantage of. Now, we're talking about activity on about three different levels. First level is the sheer volume or the quantity. And the findings are quite clear that happy individuals have a whale of a lot more activity than do average. So, on that first level alone, the principle is kind of clear. If your life is not as active and as busy as it could be, gradually increasing the amount of activity you participated in might well be, your first major steps toward a happier lifestyle. But the second level that we discovered about happy individuals is more to do not only with the quantity, but the quality, the essence of this activity. More than busyness for busyness' sake, there seems to be a certain flavor to it that I think is instructive about the general nature of happiness per se, and also something that's quite valuable to the average person to learn about. Now, the quality of happy individuals has been studied in a number of situations where happy individuals have been examined very intensely, where we've had the opportunity to really, get to know them clinically speaking, given them every test in the book that we possibly, every psychological assessment inventory, follow them day after day, really become familiar with their families, their routine, their social life, to interview them clinically on a regular basis. In those settings where we've had an example to really kind of put them under the microscope, so to speak. And in those studies, a number of key words have come out about the way they live, not particularly the quantity of it, but the quality of it. I'd like to relate those three key words to you because I think they're instructive. The first one is involvement. Spells involvement, my friends. Not going to pity around graphics this evening. but it can all be done so nicely electronically. By the way, one of the things I've noticed about doing this on TV, and I think it's a fabulous advantage, I have never seen a more well-behaved class in my entire life. I tend to think I'm going to break out cameras from here on out in my teaching career, even if they're not on. It's amazing. Of course, you all were a pretty good class to begin with, but nobody's tugging on people's hair, no spitballs, stuff like that. I'm impressed. And obviously, you wouldn't want Mom and Dad to see this on the screen later on. There's old Johnny back here, Paul. Yeah, involvement, my friends. Let's get back to that. Happy individuals live an incredibly involved life. They tend to be the type of people that throw themselves into life full tilt. They allow life to really wrap them up. They allow life to kind of consume them. They tend to throw themselves into their relationships, to their jobs, to their work, to their hobbies. Everything they do shows this tremendous engagement with the world, this tremendous involvement with it. Unhappy people at the other end of the scale seem to be very removed from life, very uninvolved. They don't let life touch them much at all. They don't really throw themselves into life. They kind of spectator as everyone else does the playing or the participating. A second key word that's also important is the word investment. What we mean by that is happy individuals are extremely strong investors in life. They tend to put themselves into what they do, not only in an involved way, but psychologically, physically, emotionally, almost 100%. They're willing to put themselves on the line. They commit themselves to the projects, to the people they're involved with. They invest a tremendous amount of their energy, a tremendous amount of their psychological energy into virtually everything that involves them in their life. They tend to throw themselves in. They tend to take risks. They tend to take challenges, and they tend to meet life head on. In other words, you get the picture of people that are really kind of hell-bent on living the full life. They want to really get the most out of it they possibly can, squeeze every drop of happiness out of their day-to-day living, and they kind of approach life with that sort of intensity, with that strong intention. Unhappy individuals at the other end of the scale seem to be very skimpy investors. They don't really put themselves into much of anything they do. They're kind of half-hearted in most of their attempts. They never put themselves out fully into their jobs, occupations. They're very skimpy, cautious investors. They kind of wait from the sidelines for life to maybe drag them in, which it often doesn't. They tend to be very cautious. They tend to not really commit themselves emotionally very strongly to their relationships, to their jobs, to their hobbies, to any of the things that surround their life. Now, it seems, therefore, when you add these two things together, you're beginning to get a rather important picture of the nature of happiness. And the nature of happiness apparently requires some involvement and some investment. It requires true living in the sense that one throws their hat in the ring and lets life kind of wrap them up. In other words, one would suggest that the more one puts into life, the more happiness one gets out of it. If one is cautious, one is skimpy, one is removed, one allows life not to touch them, one never gets hurt perhaps as much, one doesn't suffer as many defeats, but one also apparently gets very little happiness in terms of that skimpy investment. Now, a final key word that's important is the word energy. And one of the things that typifies happy individuals, and probably one of the obvious reasons why they are so active, is because of their incredibly high energy levels. Happy individuals are marvelously zestful, full of vitality, vim, and vigor, a tremendous amount of energy, both psychologically and physically, to devote to their lifestyle. So I guess a lot of you are saying, well, no wonder they are so involved, so active, so busy, always kind of on the go. They've got so much energy to devote to that, and that is possibly true. It's both a cause and an effect, but it's also an effect. In a sense, one of the things we know is that energy seems to also be developed from such an active lifestyle. So for those of you who may be more typical of unhappy people, who seem to be rather, lacking in energy, tired all the time, nothing really seems to be exciting or invigorating. There does seem to be the biological evidence or, the health evidence that if, given a reasonable degree of physical health, by subjecting yourself to increased doses of activity on a day-to-day basis, this has a way of building the body's and the psychic energy to match the regime you set yourself to if you gradually increase the exposure to a more active lifestyle. Well, I think when you add all those things together, you begin to get the picture of what happiness is all about. And from that picture, I think, you're learning not only about the quantity of activity, but the quality of the activity happy individuals surround themselves with.
Of course, these three key words all add up to one of the most important major dimensions of mental health, and that is the dimension of approach versus avoidance. For years in the literature of mental health, it has been well established that healthy, happy people tend to approach life in order to master it, whereas unhealthy people tend to withdraw from life in order to hopefully avoid it. Now, healthy, happy people use that approach, that kind of mastery idea of life, in order to be effective, in order to deal with life with their skills, their competencies. Generally, they tend to be quite competent and skillful, and therefore, they have a better chance of having life work out for them. Unhappy, unhealthy people, on the other hand, tend to avoid life, tend to withdraw from it. Many avoidance strategies, many escapist strategies. And unfortunately, when one puts themselves in a situation of avoiding life, dealing with it directly, when you haven't developed the skills and abilities to master life, obviously then life sort of pushes you around rather than you having much of an effect on it. Well, we talked about both the quality and the quantity of personal happiness. And now, of course, the most interesting part of the research, because in addition to the sheer volume of activity that happy individuals surround themselves with, and the quality, the essence of that activity that we've been talking about, there's also some interesting data regarding 5 specific types of activities that happy individuals surround themselves with.
There's one other point that we have discovered in the research that I think is more important than these two, because I think it's the most instructive of the 3 elements that we have developed. And that is, in addition to the general idea of happiness, we have also discovered some rather interesting things about the specific types of activities that happy individuals surround themselves with. And here's where we get to the real bottom line, the kinds of things that I think will be the most helpful for you and most helpful for anybody who wants to begin to live a happier lifestyle. What are those activities that happy individuals spend much more of their time in compared to other individuals? Well, there are 5 that we have identified. 2 of them so important they have become separate fundamentals in our listing. But let me give you those 5 activities. And here they are. I actually can't remember the specifics, so I'll just leave you with the numbers. No, actually, my friends, each one of these characteristics is how, or the kinds of things happy individuals are doing with their time. You know, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and in addition to that, they can also therefore be viewed, and the research seems to indicate this too, these are the 5 types of activities that are most happiness-producing for the average person. So, the first one. Happy individuals, according to the statistics, spend much more of their time than do average and unhappy people in activities that are sheerly enjoyable. Enjoyable activities. And therefore, we could call this the enjoyability principle, I guess. What that principle states is that enjoyable activities are more happiness-producing than non-enjoyable activities. Now, in a way, if you consider that, that seems a little ridiculous, doesn't it? It's such an obvious tautology, that it almost seems kind of silly to say. What we're suggesting is that obviously enjoyable activities produce more happiness than non-enjoyable activities. Activities that are fun to do make one happier than activities that are not fun to do. Activities that produce happiness apparently create more happiness than activities that produce unhappiness. Well, it's so obvious in a sense, why need it be said? Well, I think it needs to be said because if it is true, it is a point that is so obvious that it tends to elude the average individual greatly. If this principle is true and obvious to everyone, then the question is, why, therefore, do so many people have themselves caught up in lives where things that are fun and truly enjoyable are so minimal compared to the many non-enjoyable, boring, routine, and unhappy, stressful activities they seem to find themselves living? Now, obviously, a lot of that has to do with luck. Many people don't choose this, but because that seems to be true, maybe this principle needs to be considered. What this principle suggests, quite simply, is that the more fun things, or the more happy things you can add, the more happy activities you can add to your life, the happier person you'll be. Relatively simple proposition. Let's go to the second major category, and that is exciting activities. Yes, I know most of you had that at the top of your list, which proves the fabulous excitement principle. Happy individuals spend much more of their time in activities that are physically exciting and really active as opposed to the more tranquil, sedate, subdued activities. What we mean by this, apparently, is that for the average person, too, exciting, physically active, psychologically active, and stimulating activities tend to be a lot more happiness-producing than their more tranquil counterparts. Example. Playing a sport probably would produce a great deal more happiness than passively watching it on TV or reading about it in the sports paper later on. Going out dancing to a party or something really socially active will produce a great deal more happiness than, perhaps just laying home, reading a book tranquilly or something along that line. So, that is basically the excitement principle. The third type of activity that is most happiness-producing are new and novel activities. And happy individuals are noted for the tremendous variety of activities, the broad interest they tend to have, the numerous kinds of activities that tend to be extremely happiness-producing for them, the great variety of things that they enjoy doing that they get a kick out of. Likewise, for the average person, the principle sort of suggests that it is usually the new and novel experiences in our lives that are rated as the happiest, all right? And usually we seem to get a better kick or a bigger kick out of things the very first time we do them, the very first experience we have. Other than that, most other things, usually the first time we tried a sport, even though we weren't that good at it, seemed to be the happiest or, most fun, exciting time. The first time we went to a new place, or maybe the first date with somebody new and exciting who later proved to be a dud. The novelty principle does indeed seem to hold true. That is why vacations are considered the high point for most people's yearly routine. It's a totally novel experience. New places, new faces, things along this line. The principle here, therefore, is sort of clear. For the average individual, to begin to sort of be like happy people who tend to expose themselves quite a little bit more readily to new things. They tend to be game for new sports, new hobbies, things like that. They're not afraid to try out, to sample the hundreds of thousands of things that are out there that are fun to do. Most of them relatively low cost. And so therefore, part of your happiness-increasing program, you might well be wise to add a few new kinds of things, try out some of the things you've always thought about but never really quite had the nerve to do. This is the time to add those to whatever list you're developing. Now, the fourth category is so important it obviously has become a separate fundamental in and of itself, and that is the second fundamental. Spend more time socializing. It's obvious one of the major activities happy people surround themselves with is social activities. Happy individuals spend much more of their time in social activities than do average and especially unhappy individuals that live relatively isolated, relatively lonely, relatively non-social lifestyles. As we've suggested before, happiness in a way is other people and good relationships with them. Man is the social animal, and our need for human contact is not only one of the more enriching and enjoyable human activities, but it's also essential for our mental health. Numerous studies have indicated the dilatory effects on any individual in prolonged periods of social isolation, solitary confinement, or various other situations where human contact is cut to a minimum. It is one of the quickest ways to drive the ordinary person absolutely insane. We know that human contact has a kind of an anchoring effect. It gives us perspective. It holds us down to earth, and it takes us away from the pain and the exaggeration of our own personal problems. But more than that, it's extremely enjoyable, as we will discover. And therefore, happy individuals seem to take advantage of this number one source of personal happiness, seemingly the most potent source that we discussed in The Big Board in the Sky. Now, when you combine all four of these basic things that happy individuals occupy themselves with, you get a pretty happy, fun picture, don't you? And in a sense, you might also, however, be looking at this in another sort of a way, because as you look at just those four items alone, it kind of conveys a sort of a trite image of happy individuals, doesn't it? What are happy people? Just those wild party animals, right, who are out there doing their social thing, having the time of their life, doing nothing but fun, enjoyable activities, physically exciting, going after the stimulation, trying out new things, game for anything. Well, if you get that kind of superficial image of happiness, I guess maybe there's a little truth to it. The happy people are out there having the time of their lives in theory, at least the happiest ones, or at least they're sure trying a lot more than most of us. But there's one other element, the fifth activity that happy individuals surround themselves that add a little bit more meaning or significance to this whole picture, that kind of give happy individuals perhaps a little bit more depth than just this shallow party animal kind of a thing. Because there are individuals like that, but our research indicates without this fifth element, life seems to lose something, and that kind of happiness is very short-term, very illusory, sometimes rather hollow. Happy individuals have a good time. They do a lot more things that are fun. They spend a great deal of their time socializing, both on a formal and informal, family level, with parties, clubs, organizations. Sure, they do all that. But in addition, they seem to have found in their life time for meaningful, significant, important pursuits. Now, the more lucky among them and the more lucky among you will be the ones who are able to find meaning in their career, in what they do to earn their living. And those individuals who can find something seemingly to their own value system, not everybody else would agree, but to themselves, that's highly significant, really important, really meaningful, as a way to earn one's living, as their lifestyle, so to speak, or their career style, will have going for them one of the richest happiness rewards that life has to afford. In that sense, happy individuals who are lucky enough to find this in their career are doing this all the time. On the other hand, for many others, they find a chance to add a little meaningful activity to their weekly or daily routine. Recent work by one of my colleagues in Holland, as a matter of fact, Ruud Venhoven, discovered that in his recent distillation of happiness data, the second that's been done, really major distillation since my early work in '72, he came to the newer conclusion that one of the major ingredients apparently in this happiness lifestyle, one of the things that contributed to personal happiness among many other characteristics that apparently did not, was happy individuals do seem to spend a good deal more of their time, or do seem to do volunteer community work, charity work, working toward various kinds of civic or public or social causes that really concern them. And that seems to be one of the differentiating factors. So, when you add all of these things up, you begin to get the picture of the happy lifestyle. It's pretty clear what our lessons are today. Simply being more active is great, just for its own sake. At the lowest level, just being physically active seems to help a depressed mood. Recent hospital studies indicate that even chronically depressed patients can gain a little therapeutic effect from jogging or other regimes like that. But what this fundamental suggests more than anything is that the maximum is that involved, wrapped up, full life. That life of being extremely active, packing as much living into your life as you can, and especially trying to gravitate more to these types of activities than to activities that are boring, monotonous, routine, the chores that mean nothing, the efforts that don't seem to lead anywhere. Happy individuals seem to be able to determine the differences between those two and gravitate toward that.
Well, those are the 5 types of activities that seem to be the most happiness-producing for the average people. At least according to the research, enjoyable activities, exciting activities, new or novel activities, social activities, of course, and the final one, the life of meaning, meaningful activities. Well, how can you make these principles come alive for you in your day-to-day living? Well, the very list that you have been creating, or hopefully will create after the show, will begin to help you understand a little bit better how you could employ these general principles in a very tailor-made, specific program just for your happiness improvement. And to do that, we need to head back to the studio and find out a little bit more about how to use these lists to make you a happier person.
Well, we can't change your lifestyle, obviously, overnight. So what can we do? Well, my suggestion is, let's see how we could begin to take the first few steps. And to do that, what I'd like to do is return once again to your list. And let's look at that list for a few kind of insights as to, how one would go about beginning to kind of model their lifestyle after that of the happiest people. Now, you look at your list, and what I'm suggesting to you is quite simple. Apparently, what you have down there are the kinds of things that happy people spend a great deal of their time doing. So as you examine that list, and imagine for a moment, just one brief, fleeting, golden moment, that was all you ever had to do. And you could just spend your time picking and choosing from this list. No more job, no more chores, no more housework, no more taking care of the dogs, the kids, whatever. Hey, this was all you had to do. I think if you look that over, you're kind of getting the point. It would be a pretty happy lifestyle, at least a little bit happier than the one you're living now. Now, like I said, we can't change it overnight, but we can begin to add to it. Why aren't we living that way? That's the question. And people come up with a number of objections. I think the foremost objection most people come up with, well, gee, it sounds great. Don't you have to be a millionaire to live this kind of a lifestyle? Mega bucks lifestyles for the rich and famous. And it would help. But since that doesn't happen, what we're suggesting is, let's look over that list and see how much money really matters. Put a dollar sign by each one of the things on that list that require more than, say, $4 or $5 to do. That gives you gas money to the beach. It lets you dine out at Burger King! And I'm getting paid for that, by the way. By McDonald's. Now, this is not that formal. I mean, some people take this analysis as if it's, got to be precise. It doesn't. I just wanted you to look over the items and you look, how many of you found that most of your pleasures are expensive? Yeah, well, we see one hand, and unfortunately it tends to be the one right in front of the camera. But the vast majority of you apparently found something different. Now, there are going to be individuals who discover that most of their taste is sort of expensive, and many of them are usually born rich, so there's no problem. But if that's not the case, obviously a megabuck income is going to, be something one has to bear in the back of their mind. But look at the rest of you. What did you discover? Apparently, you're all members of what we might call the cheap thrills crowd, right? Apparently, if this list is truly representative of your sources of happiness, the best things in life are free. That you don't have to be a millionaire to do what makes you happy. That's a usually rather important insight. Let's look at another objection. A lot of people say, well, hell, I can't do that because I don't have time. I've got to get organized. I'll never have any fun because it requires so much planning. Well, let's look at your list that way. How many of the items on your list require a great deal of planning and organization to do? In other words, you really got to think about it days in advance. You got to really plan. Like vacations, for example. I know most of you, you got to get the tickets, you got to get the reservations, you got to call the motel, the 800 number, you got to get the traveler's check, you got to pack, you got to know what to wear, you got to call it, find out what the temperature is going to be. By the time you get there, you're absolutely exhausted and have a miserable time because you had to plan so much. But I know a lot of you just get out there in the interstate, stick out your thumb, and you're on vacation. You might want to have a party. Most of you all just have to let it know. The rumor will be spread around campus here that you got a keg, and your party happens. If you want to have a more fancy dinner affair like the doctor has to, forced to because of his social position, engraved invitations, the butler planning the meal for days in advance. It requires some planning. So, nonetheless, how have you found that most of your pleasures require a great deal of planning to do? You've got to really think days in advance to have any fun. No. Once again, and by the way, this is very typical. This is what I find. Almost 95% of the people in almost every class find that not only are their pleasures relatively inexpensive, but they don't require a great deal of planning or organization to do. I think those are two very freeing insights. If indeed that's true, it means something rather important about the nature of your happiness. One, that a great deal of money may not necessarily have to be part of it for you to be a happy person. And two, these things are kind of readily available to you most of the time. Obviously, the question once again, if those things are true, why aren't we doing these more often? Now, the third way I want you to analyze your list, and it doesn't matter what other symbols you have, this is all very quick and informal, is to put an S by any of the pleasures on your list that are social in nature, that require at least one other person along with you to have the fun you had in mind. For example, I don't know, going to movies, is that much fun by yourself? Do you like the doctor does, go out to the drive-in with one of those inflatable plastic dolls for company? No. I mean, that's not much fun. Can you imagine going bowling all by yourself on a Saturday night? Wouldn't that be great? Oh, yeah. You'd have your own private way. You could bowl, nobody in front of you, just as many times as you wanted to. Meanwhile, the friends are over there, the bowling team is over here, the gang is there, the family is over here, everybody shrieking, shouting, hugging, having the time of their lives. And there you are with your own little private lane. It'd be kind of a miserable experience, wouldn't it? If excited. Even letter writing is inherently social. How many of you found you had many more social pleasures than non-social, solitary ones? Yeah, once again, the majority seems to rule. Now, some individuals have many more solitary pleasures on their list, and that, statistically speaking, is a little more typical of unhappier people. All right? Nonetheless, I think it's valuable for anyone to have a few solitary pleasures, but the point is that I think most of you began to realize the veracity of fundamental number 2. You know, of the fact that social interaction is the most happiness-producing source there is. Because as you look over your list, you begin to realize how meaningless, how empty, and really how non-fun most of those activities would be if you were forced to do them all by yourself. Really what makes most things on people's list truly fun is that they're shared with your friends, your family, your boyfriend, your close lover, the gang, whatever. And most of those activities by themselves would be pretty meaningless, if not rather unhappy. A cookout by yourself? Sure. Wow. I mean, you'd have all the steaks yourself. But not much of a compensation, would it be? Now the final step, the bottom line, my friends. I want you to go over your list one more final time and put down a star. That's what we're looking for by any of the activities on your list that are infrequent, that you don't do that often. That's what we're looking for. And I'd say by infrequent, use as a rough rule of thumb, if you don't do it at least twice a week, put a star by it tentatively. And in the case of that, you might want to compare yourself to the national average in a recent study of successful couples, which seems to be an average about 4.2 times a day. Boy, I love it. When we got the cameras on, everybody believes me, don't they? Successful couples do it 4.2 times a day. No way, my friends. Actually, it's true. That's why I think that answers the musical question, why there aren't that many happy couples. The one we found died a few months after we studied them from sheer exhaustion. But they were happy, and that's the point of the 14 fundamentals, my friends. Yeah. Now, if you've got a number of things on your list that are relatively infrequent, then you can begin to employ this very simple program that we developed early in the happiness research game. It's quite a simple idea, and yet at the same time, in our initial pilot research, we used this just one program by itself in our pilot studies and found out that this one program all by itself had an extremely positive effect, a significant statistical effect on people's happiness. And it was a simple kind of a proposition. What we did was we had them start off with a list very much like yours. And then we had them work on those lists. The idea being to come up eventually with a master list of activities that they could pick and choose from to do. Now, to be included in this final listing, each activity had to pass 3 tests, which are obvious because we wanted these things to be feasible. The first thing that each item on the test had to pass was simple enough because everyone on your list already is like this, and that is every activity had to be enjoyable. So that was the first criteria. So now they have a whole list of enjoyable activities just like you already have. But the second priority cut a lot of things off the list. And that was that these were all things, number 2, that the person didn't do that often, or didn't do as often as they might or would like to. The infrequency test, the things you put the stars by, okay? The idea of this might be obvious, it might not be. We wanted them to have a list of things that were highly enjoyable, but things they didn't do that often. So if indeed they added these things to their daily routine, they would indeed be additions to their normal lifestyle, not more of the same old routine. The third criteria that each item had to pass was the feasibility test. Each item had to be something the person could conceivably do almost any day of the week or weekend in the area they happen to be living in. Now, the reason for this, of course, is we didn't want all kinds of things on the list that would obviously be fun, dining at, fancy restaurant, going to New York, jewelry shopping, buying a mink stole. Things that just weren't feasible. That would be a rather devastating experiment to work with. We wanted these things to be things a normal person could conceivably do given the constraints of their situation. So now what do we have? We had a list for each person, therefore, each individually created, and you could do this yourself, that had about 20 or more items. Each item something that was usually always fun. Each item was something the person didn't do that often, so would be an addition. And each item relatively inexpensive or feasible for the person to do. And then they were off to the races. Now, one other parenthetical comment. We also took advantage of the novelty principle and encouraged them to put down on their list a few things they might never have tried, but that they anticipated would be fun, all right? And encouraged them maybe to try those out during this experimental period. Now, during our early experiments, it's important to know, these people had no idea what the object of the study was. They didn't know anything about happiness. We did not talk particularly about that itself. This was an experiment. They sort of volunteered for it, required to do it as part of class assignments and stuff. And it sounded like fun. Here they created this list of things that were fun to do, and their only requirement, but they had to bound themselves to this during the experimental period, was that they were to go out each and every day and do one or more of those activities. No matter what else they did, they had to do that. We literally forced them, in other words. Forced them to have fun. And it worked. Statistically speaking, at the end of relatively short periods of time, 2 weeks, 2 months, various other time frames that we studied, just by adding one enjoyable activity to average people's normal routine had a significantly boosting effect on their happiness. Well, I think therein lies an important point for the rest of you. Obviously, at the maximum, it would be great if you could model your entire lifestyle in accordance with these principles. And eventually that could be your goal. But on the very minimum level, it's suggesting by maybe just looking over your list and reconsidering some of these principles, you might be able to add just a little bit more pleasure to your life, and that indeed should be the beginning steps of adding a little bit more happiness to your life. What this fundamental suggests is, at the very worst, keep busy. At the very lowest level, it's one of the best antidotes for personal depression. Keeping active, keeping up with the routine, not to give in to that tendency to let everything go, to give up, and so on and so forth. But the very best, it indicates, live that full life. Live that active life, and devote yourself more, perhaps, to activities like this than the activities that surround your day-to-day routine. Well, my friends, I think that's just about all I have for you this evening. It's been an enjoyable experience for me, and I hope you've enjoyed your presence here, too. So, to our next class, we'll see. Thank you. Oh, stop that.
Well, we're ending this episode high in the Hollywood Hills overlooking the Los Angeles basin as the sun is beginning to set most appropriately in the west. We've had a good time bringing these very brief shots to you. But before we go, a few thoughts, I guess, about happiness. It's pretty clear from what we discussed in this evening's fundamental that your happiness, as far as the formula goes, may be directly the result of the number of happy experiences you have during the course of a day, a week, or a month. And therefore, the formula reads, quite simply, that the more of those pleasurable activities you could add to your day-to-day regime, your weekly regime, even an extra pleasure once a month, could well improve overall your happiness status in life. But sometimes when we discuss the happiness lifestyle, it may be clear to many of you that it's not as easy as we've made it out to be. And believe me, I understand that. The fundamentals are meant as general guidelines. They may not necessarily, every one of them, apply to every person. And sometimes changing one's life to even add the slightest pleasures may require a great deal of alteration, some very important and very tough choices to make. I sympathize with those tough choices, and I know that many of you will find that happiness is not quite as easy as the fundamentals may generally seem to imply. But nonetheless, it's certainly worth an experimental try. As you think about your life, analyze it in the terms that we're presenting, you may find ways, subtle ways, maybe even large ways, to begin increasing your happiness by living the happy lifestyle we've seen right here. Well, it's about time to head back to the studio to find out a little bit about our next episode. So I'll see you later.
Well, there you have it, my friends. That's our program this evening on the happiness lifestyle. I hope you found it fascinating. You certainly have a lot of things to work on now with the basic cornerstone and those lifestyle fundamentals going for you. Of course, this one particular program we just described has shown significantly its ability to help individuals increase their happiness. And it's a very simple strategy, basically. The idea is that you could be much happier if you were to add maybe just one additional happiness activity to your daily lifestyle. Now, in the next program that we're going to be dealing with, we're going to be moving to some of the attitude and value fundamentals. And what's coming up is perhaps one of the most interesting programs of all, entitled The Arch Enemy of Happiness. What is the arch enemy of happiness? Well, you can wait, but I'll give you a little clue. Those of you who are worrywarts out there will be especially pleased to find out the arch enemy of personal happiness is common everyday worry. So we'll see you next time for our next program entitled The Arch Enemy of Happiness. See you then.
Well, here I am on the fabulous Sunset Strip, We're about to find out what people in California think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals. Oh, you, sir. What do you do for a living?
Not much of anything.
Well, what do you think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals?
They're great.
They're great. You have heard of them?
I think I have.
Berkeley?
Well, that's great. So you're down here on a visit.
Yeah.
What do you think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals?
What's that?
You not heard of the 14 Fundamentals Happiness Program?
No, I've never heard of it.
14 what? The 14 Fundamentals. It's a kind of a happiness program.
Never heard of it.
The 14 Fundamentals.
I don't know. Does that have something to do with Congress?
No, not really. It's kind of a happiness program. But thank you very much. Where are you from, little girl?
California.
Well, that's great. What do you think of the fabulous 14 Fundamentals?
What do you mean?
Well, it's kind of a happiness program. You've not heard of that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Well, there you have it, my friends. That's what people in Los Angeles think about the fabulous 14 Fundamentals.